Once upon a time, there was a king whose wife had died in childbirth, leaving behind a dear infant daughter, the Princess Anne. When the princess was nearly grown, the king married again, this time to a woman who also had a daughter, and her name was Kate. The stepmother became the new queen, and her daughter became the Princess Kate. The new queen was driven to distraction because the king's daughter Anne was far prettier than her own daughter Kate. She could not bear the thought that her daughter Kate would always look pale and plain beside the beautiful Anne. But bother the two young princesses it did not, and they became fast friends and loved one another like real sisters. The queen, however, was not content, and she cast about for a way to spoil Anne's beauty, so her Kate would be the prettiest princess in the castle. To that end, she sought the advice of the henwife, an old woman who lived near the palace and was known to have magical powers. "So you say young Anne is too pretty for her own good," cackled the henwife. "That is a simple enough find inside." Anne lifted the lid off the pot, and at that moment a sheep's head jumped right on top of her own pretty head and would not come off. She pulled and pulled, but try as she might, it would not budge. The queen felt entirely satisfied, and she returned home with poor Princess Anne trailing behind, her sheep's head bowed low. The servants at the palace were horrified at the terrible event that had befallen poor Princess Anne, and none was more horrified than the queen's own daughter, Kate. Anne, Kate moaned to her half-sister, "whatever shall we do?" She tried everything she could think of to get the sheep's head off, but it was firmly fixed onto Anne like her own skin. "How did this happen to you?" she cried. But whenever poor Anne tried to tell Kate, nothing but "Bah! Bah!" came out of her mouth. "Well, we can't let you be seen like this," Kate decided. She took a fine linen cloth and wrapped it around her sister's head. "We must go and try to get help." Kate took her sister by the hand, and they left the castle. They went on, and they went on and on and on, till at last they came to a castle, her own dear sister who was also quite sick. Besides, she and her sister were so very tired and so truly needed a place to spend. Of the young prince was that whoever watched him at night was never seen again. Now, if Kate would agree to stay up with him and nurse him all night long, then she and her sister could stay the night. What was more, the king would give her a peck of silver. Kate quickly agreed. So Kate and her sister were led to the prince's sick room, where they were both sumptuously fed and made comfortable for the evening. Soon Anne's sheep's head was nodding and had fallen asleep by the fire. Till midnight all went well. As the midnight bells rang, however, the sick prince got up out of bed as if in a daze, dressed himself and slipped downstairs. Kate was surprised to see him rise and move about. She followed him outside the castle, and he didn't seem to notice her. The prince went into the stable where he saddled his horse, called his hound, and jumped into the saddle. Kate lightly leapt behind him on the horse. Away they rode, and as they passed through the woods, Kate plucked nuts from the trees to have in the morning, and she filled her apron with them. When they came to a green hill, the prince drew bridle and spoke. "Open, open, green hill!" Meanwhile, Kate, without being noticed, watched the prince dance and dance and dance until he fell exhausted upon a couch. At the first ray of dawn, the cock crowed, and the prince hastened to get back on his horse. Kate jumped up behind him, and home they rode. By the time the morning sun rose, the servants entered the prince's room. Surprised indeed they were to discover that Kate was still there. There sat the girl sitting by the fire, cracking nuts. Kate said the prince had had a good night, and that she would gladly sit up with him again a second night, but for that she must have a peck of gold. The second night passed in much the same way. The prince rose at midnight and rode away to the green hill and the fairies' ball. And Kate went with him, gathering nuts as they rode through the forest. This time she did not watch the princes closely, for she knew what he would do, dance and dance all night long with the fairies. Instead, she watched a fairy baby play with a wand. Then she overheard one of the fairies say, "3 strokes of that wand would make Kate's sick sister as pretty as ever she was." So, Kate rolled nuts to the fairy baby till the baby set down the wand in order to crawl after the nuts. Kate quickly picked up the wand and removed the linen that covered her sister's sheep's head. With the fairy baby's wand, she touched her sister's head lightly 3 times. At once, the nasty sheep's head fell off, and Anne was her only to look at besides. Plus, the prince seemed no worse, and the young girl hadn't disappeared for 2 nights straight. So Kate was asked to stay yet a 3rd night with the prince. She agreed, but only if she could marry the sick prince. All went on as on the first 2 nights. This time, the fairy baby was playing with a basket of barley, and Kate heard one of the fairies say, "3 sips of barley soup would make the sick prince as well as ever he was." So, Kate rolled a few nuts she had gathered to the fairy baby, who left the basket of barley behind to chase after them. Then she reached into the basket and put a handful of barley into her apron. At cockcrow they set off again. But instead of cracking her nuts as she had done before, this time Kate boiled the barley and made a pot of barley soup. Soon there arose a very savory smell. "Oh," said the sick prince, "I wish I had a sip of that barley soup." So Kate gave him a spoonful of the soup, and he rose up on his elbow. By and by he cried out again, "Oh, if only I had but another sip of that soup." So Kate gave him another spoonful, and Meanwhile, the prince's brother had met Anne in the castle byways, and he had fallen in love with her, as nearly...
In a certain city in India there lived a boy with his mother, a poor young widow. Though in difficult circumstances, the mother managed to provide her son with an education in writing and arithmetic. One day, when the boy had become a young man, the widow said to him, "Son, though we are poor, you are the son of a merchant. I've heard about a rich merchant in the city who is in the habit of lending money to worthy young men who show an interest in business and the willingness to work hard. This may be your best chance to get started in earning a livelihood. Go see him, please." So the young man went to the rich merchant's house. Just as he entered the front door, he overheard an angry conversation. "You see this dead mouse lying on the floor?" the rich merchant said to another young man. "A capable young man could build wealth from something as lowly as that. But I gave you, you good-for-nothing fellow, a small fortune, and far from increasing it, you haven't even been able to keep the amount that I lent you." When he heard this, our young man stepped into the room, picked up the dead mouse, and announced to the merchant. Also in the meal, and in the same way, he obtained more wood from the woodcutters the very next day. And so in time he was able to buy all the wood that they had cut over the past 3 days. It so happened that a period of heavy rains followed, when no dry firewood could be bought anywhere, and the youth sold his stock of wood for a large sum. With these proceeds he set up a shop, began to engage in trade, and before long became wealthy by his own ability. One day the young man commissioned a golden mouse to be made, and he sent it to the rich merchant from whom he had gotten his start. The merchant was flabbergasted to receive such a fine gift, and he barely remembered the youth, except for a crumpled and torn receipt still tucked in his ledger. He invited the youth to visit him and his daughter for supper one evening. As one thing so often leads to another, the young man and the merchant's daughter soon fell in love, and they were married. For the rest of his life, the merchant was known as Mousey the merchant, because of the dead mouse that provided his start, and he never minded the nickname, not one bit.